I will bring this meeting to order. This is our September meeting of the California Insurance Appeals Board meeting for September 20th. The board will accept public comment on any agenda item or any other matter under the jurisdiction. Speakers are asked to limit their testimony to approximately 5 minutes on each agenda item and any other matter under its jurisdiction not listed on the agenda. And I would also point out that the order of the agenda items may be changed to accommodate the board or the public. So with that, we'll begin the roll call. Michael Allen, Chair, is present.
Laura Kent-Monning, Vice Chair, present.
Michael Eng, present.
Robert Wachowski is here.
Well, thank you. We successfully navigated our roll call. We can move on. So the next thing we have on our agenda is the approval of the minutes for the August 16th, 2023 meeting.
So moved.
So we have a motion on the floor. Second?
Second
Okay.
the motion.
All those in favor signify by aye.
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 Aye. So we have approved the minutes. With the board members' report, first of all, I think that the most important thing is to thank all the employees of the agency and all our field offices here locally in Sacramento. Sometimes it's important just never to take anything for granted in terms of people working so hard to try to do the public's business. And I wanted to take this moment just to thank them. You know, we have many of our offices spread out throughout the state, as well as our central location here in Sacramento. And so, and maybe I've done this at many other meetings, but I just want to recognize that at all levels of the organization, whether it's our field judges or appeal judges, the staff that supports them, our IT department that we depend on, all the, you know, the person who does our budget and who works on our budget, all those administrative people, it takes a whole lot of people to make an agency function well. And I do believe we have a very well functioning agency. So, the other thing that I think I should be reporting on is that in the month of August, we heard and decided in excess of 34,000 cases, which is not insignificant. And here for the on the board, a lot of you know that we come for our board meetings. Sometimes our board meetings last an hour, sometimes longer, depending on how much business we have to conduct. But the vast majority of our work is done deciding cases at the second appeals level. And our board this past in August decided over 1,328 cases. Of those, 267 were done in our new system for CAMS. So that concludes my my report, and I'll turn it over to our vice chair and our other board members for their reports.
Thank you, Chair Allen. My brief report this month is just to let my colleagues know and the public that I was invited earlier in the month to join our IT staff and some outside vendors to work on improving the CAMS interface for board members. And it was a great meeting, and even just a couple days ago, I was sent a preview of what some of the improvements will be, and it's really going to be great, I think, to streamline the interface that we all use to conduct our work and to improve the user experience with CAMS. So I just wanted to thank AO Supervising Judge Bach for inviting me to that meeting, and also Mark, Larry, and Rada at the RIT team for the tremendous amount of work that goes into making those improvements. The short amount of time is just the meeting discussing it, and then all the work that has to happen afterwards. So I'm really excited to see how this system can continue to improve, to have all of us do the best work that we can do. So thanks to everyone for that.
Well, thank you. Member Eng?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on your reports and the Vice Chair's reports, about a week ago, I woke up to the worst case scenario. I could not log onto my CUIAB account on a day in which we had many CAMS cases as well as legacy cases. To the next several hours, I must have used the services of everyone at the help desk, and I now know why it's called the help desk, because I was saying help. And I was able to complete my assignments by the early afternoon. So I also want to thank my board colleagues and the appellate office judges for their patience and understanding that I was not able to respond to their important comments in a timely manner. I do believe that we have one of the best help desks in the state, and I don't know what the acronym HELP means, but it means that when we have technology challenges, as sometimes we do, we can call and get an immediate assistance. So I wanted to thank I don't see Jefferson here, but if you could convey my appreciation to Jefferson for everyone on the help desk. I must have used all 48 of them. I'm kidding. There's probably a few, and I used them all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, with our reliance on technology, we could call it the panic desk at times, but it's truly the help
It's
desk.
called the panic desk.
Member Wachowski.
I have nothing to report out. I'm hopefully am looking forward to visiting some of the field offices in my area and in the state to see how we coordinate with them. And also interested in pending legislation before the governor and what that may mean to our workload and what the agency does. So nothing yet.
Thank you for your reports from all the board members. This is the portion of the agenda where we have any public comment. I'd ask, is there any public comment? Anybody phoning in? Any video?
Chair Allen, I have no hands raised for public comment at this time.
Okay, hearing that there's no public comment, we'll move on to a report by Michael Kutry, our Chief Executive Director, an update on the state of the agency and field workload.
Morning, Chair Allen and board members. Chair Allen, thank you for recognizing the very large output of decisions issued by the field offices in August, 34,268 to be exact. It is a month of quite high production. Our seasonal leave has declined. The new ALJs are up to speed, and the CAMS rollout in Inglewood, which is a large office, is complete. So it was a time for us to get a little catch up, and we did. Incoming monthly appeals continue their 8-month decline. They dropped another 12% in August, which is a welcome reprieve from the high workloads we've had for the past 3 years. The open inventory of unemployment and PUA cases in the field operations has dropped 25% since February. So we're doing quite well. Average case age continues to hover at a steady amount. It's within 0.2 of a percentage point of the last meeting at 139.6 days, a very slight decrease. Unfortunately, nationally, it looks even worse. So we're at 194 days in national case aging. So California still is positioned well in that trend. We expect to improve upon it and to continue to stay ahead of the curve nationally. To that end, we continue to onboard new staff and judges wherever we can. Supervising Judge Morrison in San Diego has 2 small training cohorts going right now for the last of the prior recruitment. So that's 3 new ALJs that'll be on board shortly. She's then going to pivot to provide intermediate training to the ALJs who've been hired in the last year. So that's on more complex topics, usually arrives around the 6 to 8 month mark of their experience and allows them to do more complex cases for us. On CAMS, some great news to report. Mr. Smith will share some in a couple minutes as well. As I mentioned, Inglewood has completely rolled in. Inland is underway, so the judges will be trained next week, and then the trainers will move on to their next 2 offices after that, and those will be the final 2 field offices. So they'll go to Pasadena next, and then they'll go to the Bay Area. We talked about at the last meeting whether we'd be finished by the end of the year, and our goal is still to finish before January. And then we will do some follow-up training for anybody who missed the prior training or needs more training in the field operations, and then we'll move on to the tax department. But hopefully by January, all of our field offices will be in, and that's a tremendous boost to the public, to our field offices, and to our ability to manage our caseload. As an example, as we move into the final 2 field offices, we're aggressively moving cases around the state to normalize the wait times that appellants are experiencing. For example, we moved 6,000 cases this week, from offices that have more staff to offices or less staff to more staff, so that people don't have to wait an inordinate amount of time based on their location. Important developments that Mark Smith will get into in CAMS in terms of language access, so we're very proud of that. And in closing on CAMS, I just would like to thank the Steadfast training team for all of their efforts. When they roll out an office, they leave home, some of them for weeks at a time, to be on call and to be on the ground helping those offices. And a lot of that occurred during peaks of the pandemic. So this was a huge operation. They have been incredible to work with, and the fruit of their labors is about to be realized. So we're very proud of them. Coming up, we're meeting with Department of Labor Region 6 to discuss national and state workload and timeliness. Importantly, the Department of Labor's Quality Control Conference has been on hold since during the pandemic, and they're looking to reestablish that conference in Washington, D.C. next year. That's where all of the states meet to discuss the quality review criteria that DOL imposes upon the states, and we try to get better at judging it and training it, and we may even see some new criteria which pop up. And so we look forward to bringing those experiences back to our field operations and our hearing ALJs. We're still engaged with the Department of Labor's vendor for process improvement, equity, and fraud prevention. And then we expect that in next month's meeting to come to some sort of fruition in terms of what they're offering us in terms of support and solutions. So I'll report back to the board after that meeting. Don't have any security matters to report on this month.
That's good.
I'm happy to say. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Board members, do you have any questions?
I did have a question. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Oh, thank you. This is just to recognize 6,000 cases moved this week. Can you just give us a glimpse of what that would have looked like in the legacy system to move 6,000 cases around?
I don't believe it ever happened on that scale
Right.
in the legacy system. It would have required packaging up hundreds of files at a time in dozens of boxes, cataloging them all for security purposes, and then shipping them from one office to another office, where they then had to be reverse unpacked and processed. So it was a multi-week process just to move hundreds of files, and now we're doing it overnight.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So kudos to everyone, because that just, you can say it really quickly, moving 6,000 cases this week, but that's tremendous improvement with this new system. So thank you.
Unheard of in our history, so we're very proud of that
Thanks.
ability.
Yeah, I know last month we dropped 3,000 cases because it was vacation time or something like that. So the 6,000 is an adjustment from the drop of 3,000?
It is actually, the 6,000 are still in our inventory to be scheduled for hearing, but we're moving them to places that can hear them faster. So when we have, for example, when we have summer leave, not all offices are equally impacted by that, and so they get behind. And so this allows us to fine tailor the upcoming workload that an office will experience.
And you said that the inland office is in the middle of adapting the CAMS. Should I hold that for Mr. Smith when he does the?
I'll give you a preview.
Okay.
The ALJs will be trained next week, and then that means that the office, so they spend about 3 weeks before the ALJs are trained scanning and migrating all of the work into the digital environment. And then they train the judges and they hear their first cases. So that'll be next week. And then they'll be left with a degree of support for the next couple weeks. But those trainers will then move on and start to import and scan and migrate all the cases in the Pasadena office while they're still supporting inland. So their judges will operate and their office staff will operate exclusively in CAMS by the end of next week.
You reported that the quality control conference is going to resume in Washington, D.C. I presume that at your September meeting with the federal Department of Labor agents, you'll be talking, amongst other things, sort of California's quality control. Going forward, we used to do everything in person. Then we had the pandemic and we did everything on the telephone. I'm still fuzzy of if it's in our concept of going to Zooms or using Zoom in addition to telephones, because we've looking at the trier of fact to look at the witness, listen to their testimony, decide credibility. And part of that is when you're looking at a person versus listening to them on the phone. Can you give me a preview, or us a preview, of what those quality control elements may look like? Or am I off the rocker with the video or Zoom?
Video is not an element of any of the federal quality review criterion because most states are not using it, have never used it. So there has been a mix across the nation of in-person and telephonic. And so we were primarily in-person before the pandemic, and then we shifted to primarily telephonic, whereas many states have always been all telephonic. And so now there's still a mix. Some states have piloted some video technology. It's not in widespread use. So I don't expect that the Department of Labor criteria will reflect any video use at the next session. It may going forward, but I think then the quality criteria would then reflect more closely reflect an in-person hearing where we have actual visual exchange between the parties and the ALJ. So I think that's how we would score those if that were the case. But right now, the criteria, are neutral as to format of hearing.
And do we have, because sometimes we have the agency, we have the claimant, we have the employer, we have the employer's three witnesses, and if it was a mixed bag, would our ALJs or our computer system be able to handle a mixture of Zoom, telephone, and in person? I guess that would be the grand slam.
We've had that discussion. Mark can probably talk far more to the technology than I can, but we think it is possible at some point. It's going to be a pretty heavy lift to implement, and we have our plate pretty full right now, but that's something that we certainly have dreamt about and could see happening in the future.
Yeah, because Chair Ellen and Vice Chair Kent Monning and Board Member Ng, I can envision where somebody has a document or somebody has some evidence that they want to have, and we know now that people in a Zoom will put it on the screen, so everybody's looking at the same piece of evidence at the same time, so that there's no misunderstanding of what it is.
That would be a wonderful, nimble technology. We would still be limited by the party, if any, who did not have access to that technology. So we would, of course, accommodate the due process rights of all of those parties.
Right.
But to expand that to the parties who are able to use it would be fantastic.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. I've been assuming that we've been slowly coming out of the pandemic, and we're still adjusting to it. What is the proportion of cases that we're doing by telephone versus in-person hearing?
I believe it's less than 1% still in person.
Okay.
We're accommodating every request.
Uh-huh.
But I can get you a hard figure between now and the next
Okay.
meeting.
No. Well, that's good to know. Thank you. Member Ng, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, congratulations on, as was said before, on the increase from 28 to 34,000 adjudications in the field office between July and August. I guess you anticipated my question that I've asked every month, which is the CAMS rollout to the field offices. Last month reported it was possibly the beginning of January. Now I understand it might be optimistically, even realistically, by the end of the year. So my question is, when do you anticipate our cases to be 100% CAMS cases? And secondly, when the rollout is complete, I take it there will be no longer any legacy cases or legacy type hearings permitted anymore. It'll be totally CAMS cases?
That will be true.
And possibly will there be a conversion from legacy to CAMS even earlier than the end of the year?
There will still be a small trail of cases in legacy as we catch up to scanning all of the work into CAMS. So right now, the board appeals that come in that were heard in legacy are still processed in legacy, but we're gonna have to stop that process and scan them so that everything you see eventually will be in CAMS. I don't know if that will dovetail perfectly with the field office rollout in December, or there will still be some trail into the new year where the board is seeing cases in legacy. We're actually sitting down to talk about those issues now as we contemplate the next step after the full FO rollout.
I'm not complaining, but the number of CAMS cases is still fractionally proportionate to the number of legacy cases. So I assume at a certain point they'll be 50-50 and then complete.
They will,
complete
probably
CAMS.
sooner than later,
Yeah.
the tipping
Okay.
point will be reached, and then we will have to proactively
All right.
digitize cases for CAMS.
I will retreat to my desk immediately
Because
after the meeting.
Because we don't want all of the users to have to use two systems any longer than they have to.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the board? Okay, I do have one question for you, and it probably has to do with my long tenure on the board and remembering that at one time we had this problem with the backlog of tax cases. It kind of it disappeared because we got additional resources to deal with the tax cases. And for the benefit of the public, we just don't do unemployment law. We do disability law, and we have tax cases, and we have all sorts of different odds and ends that we administer. But where are we with our tax inventory of cases?
We have been very fortunate to have two incredibly hardworking retired annuitants, both of whom are extremely skilled in tax. They've been hearing all of the urgent type matters in those cases and making sure that we have an inflow and outflow of tax matters so that we're not stagnant. That said, we're going to need to bolster that unit in the coming year. And that's usually a natural transition
Right.
where we pivot away from the historic backlogs that were created by the recession, the Great Recession, and the pandemic, and then we move it back into what would be business as usual, and we would use some field office resources to help us get rid of some of the tax backlog. So we've been making sure to produce in tax, but we will need to accelerate that effort. Now, the department also slowed its tax production during the pandemic.
Right.
Because on-site audits were limited for quite some time. So as that accelerates, that will increase our workload, and that probably will also coordinate quite nicely with the reduction in unemployment.
Okay. Something to look forward to, board members, tax cases. So, so with that, we'll go to our next report from Rebecca Bach, who is our supervising administrative law judge for appellate operations, and we'll get an update on the state of our workload for the appellate division.
Good morning. For appellate operations, August was actually a really good month. To meet the Department of Labor guidelines, we were to close 50% of our cases within 45 days, and for August, we closed 49.3% of our cases within 45 days, making our year average 55%, so that was very positive. And we are to close, for Department of Labor guidelines, we're to close 80% of our cases within 75 days. We closed in August 73.1% of our cases within 75 days, making our year-to-date average 78.5, which is almost that 80%, so strong number there. We are also, per Department of Labor guidelines, supposed to have an average case aging of 40 days, and at the end of August, our average case aging was 38.9, so that's a good number. And to complement something that goes along with something that Chief Kutry was saying, the drop in PUA cases, I will also note that in second level in appellate operations, last month, 15% of our open balance caseload were still PUA cases, and this month, at the end of August, it was down to 8%. So it dropped by 7% in a month, which is, I think, reflective of how it's dropping in the field, showing up at dropping in AO as well. And so all really good numbers. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good report. Questions from the board? Seeing none, you escaped any questioning. We'll move on. We'll move on for our agenda. So today we have Mark Smith with Information Technology Supervisor doing an update on our information technology branch. I've been told by people they did not recognize you in a suit and tie. They're not used to seeing you that way. But we welcome you to our board meeting.
Thank you.
So take it away, Mark.
Chair Allen and members of the board, good to see you. It's my pleasure to represent IT today. So you've already heard about our rollout to the offices with CAMS. So I just want to reiterate, we are on schedule for the last two offices. We are right where we plan to be here. So this is that process has smoothed out. The training is going wonderfully. The logistics to get offices up and set up for the training, which is fairly complex, is going well as well. So we're happy with that and looking forward to wrapping up the new introductions to offices at the end of the year here.
Wow.
On the stabilization front, we're pleased to speak to the getting language translations out on our portal. The portal is a new feature that we have with CAMS now that we'd never had the pleasure of being able to offer the public before. We have Spanish translation of that portal in testing. It's rolling into our user acceptance environment where we'll be able to bring in translators. We can also show it off to you folks. But we're rather excited. This is the first time we'll be bringing in folks from outside, like the translation crew, to see the language in its context as opposed to just a table of items to be translated, and get an evaluation on that. Vietnamese is also in that test environment and will be following shortly. So we are looking at just a matter of weeks for Spanish, and then probably one board meeting cycle behind that for the Vietnamese. And next in the queue is Chinese, both traditional and simplified text versions for that. So all those are in the pipeline and will be out available to the public fairly shortly.
That's really good news. Thank you.
It is very good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the infrastructure has been put in place so that additional languages should be deliverable within about a month of their being translated. So the plumbing behind the scenes on this is engineered to allow us to deploy languages very quickly once we get them going. As mentioned earlier, we also have some interface improvements, particularly in the board discussion pages. Those we just saw, and those were, besides our staff's great work, we have a vendor that's offering us really good solutions really quickly. So we're very happy, and this particular one comes from them. And so thanks to them also. Other enhancements, we're making improvements in that portal interface. I spoke just this last week with an expert on what they call userization, which is basically allowing, rather than people having to learn a process, which our new portal users are having to learn a process of creating their accounts and then self-managing their case information, allowing that process to guide them and teach them a little more. So it has a lot to do with the context that the user's in at the moment, and allowing the interface to speak to them when it notices they slow down, when it notices they're not making a choice when they're offered with a choice, providing them more prompts and information, that type of thing. So we're very excited about moving into that. As also mentioned earlier, this redirection of the work that we're able to do with CAMS, we just recently put in some enhancements that allow us to do that also for offices that are not in CAMS, which has been very important for a couple offices in particular. We're able to absorb their work that's going to be redirected into CAMS and then send it to a CAMS office. And so that has been a big benefit for us. And then touching briefly on the user feedback from the public. We have a couple points of feedback. We're looking to enhance that. The feedback we've been receiving actually for quite a while, has been fairly consistent both in volume and in message. And a number of the things that people are looking for in terms of easier account registration and the password issues really kind of dominate that scene. But those are all features which are being addressed. One way that's being addressed is we just made some configuration changes in our email. Some users were reporting the email that they get from the portal to complete their login would go to junk mail, or they'd never see it, or it contains a link in it for a security link to allow them to go in and set a password. That's a one-time use link, and a lot of people's email systems, in previewing that email when it comes in so they can see what it is, actually consumes that one use. And so then when they click on it, they're not able to go and reset their password. They're then stuck back in the login page. Very frustrating for users, frustrating for us in helping users. But these changes in configuration to the email should prevent both of those things, both the junk mail redirection and this consumption. So we'll be looking over the next month at the count of help calls we get on those issues. And I think that Yeah, that wraps it up for what I need to share with you. Open to questions.
Okay. Vice Chair Monning, no, go ahead. I'll ask my questions later. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the detailed report and for filling in while Jefferson is out. Just when you were mentioning the feedback, I'm just curious if you're getting, it seems like you're getting email feedback on the portal, but when people are having that issue that described, in real time trying to set up their account, are they calling as well and trying to get help on a phone call? Is that what's happening?
There are people calling the offices when they have that at their fingertips, yes. And our crew, there's a core crew of sort of power users on the business side of things. It's not even IT taking care of them most of the time. It's the people in the office. It's our expert users who are also the training team. These folks are helping people on a one-on-one basis and getting them signed in and getting these problems taken care of.
And how has the volume of that been for our staff, the power users? Manageable or something that's been challenging?
It varies. I actually haven't seen most of it. I hear about it primarily from about two of them that I do talk with regularly, but I couldn't give you a sense of scale.
Well, I think it's great that there is someone that someone can call, because as we all know, when you're trying to do something and you reach an endpoint with the electronic interface, it is helpful to get someone, a real
Very much.
person, even though I think that can be challenging to have enough support to do that, right? But it's great to know that that is an option for people, and then that process helps identify this larger issue that the team can then sort out with the email that you're talking about. So thank you for sharing all of that with us, and thanks to
I'd like
those-
to call out John Zinto as an individual who's tremendously helpful to both us in IT and to the users, and he's on that training team, and he's been tenacious and a voracious in terms of absorbing information on this new system and learning it and being able to teach it, and just a tremendous job.
Oh, great. So thanks to John Zinto, and thanks, Mark.
Okay. Member Ring, you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Smith, for being here. And as I said earlier, if you could convey my appreciation to Jefferson about what I just said.
Certainly.
Thank you for highlighting the progress made in the translation. As you know, in my personal opinion, the translation issue is a fundamental due process issue. And we notice sometimes there are complaints or comments about the quality of the translation, whether they're accurate or not. I wanted to find out, is there any mechanism by which those complaints are monitored? Does anyone have a duty to disclose a complaint during a hearing or during the appeals process that the translation was inadequate? Or is it dependent solely on board members to notice that? On board members and the appeals and the field judges.
I can take the policy side of that. We do have a interpreter or a language access complaint unit. Language access complaint unit. So our language access supervisors also field all of the complaints about interpreting, translation, anything that they encounter. So if we get a complaint about an interpreter at the field office level, we pass it along to those folks. So they can actually review the hearing with a qualified interpreter to see if there were any errors. They can review a translation with a qualified interpreter, and then we can take corrective action if needed.
So in other words, if someone can complain at the hearing, and you're saying then that the field judge would then be required to report that?
Then they would work with the supervising judge in the office to establish a baseline of the quality that's expected of the interpreter. And if we see a pattern there at the field level, we have individuals at the language services desk that we reach out to and we say, look, we've got a problem with this interpreter. If we think retraining would help, they can provide the retraining. If it's an issue of talking to the interpreter staff supervisor, we can do that too and set expectations at that level. So there's sort of a sliding scale of outcomes that could happen there, up to and including discontinuation of the use of any particular interpreter.
Okay, and then if the complaint is made in the appeals process, then I would take it, it would be, okay, if the complaint goes to the field, if the complaint is made during the field hearing, then the field judge would have a protocol to report that. Is that what you're saying?
Not only report it, but they would have to work through it at the hearing so they're trained to assess the qualifications of the interpreter at the hearing. And if there's a complaint that arises during the hearing by any party present to it, they have to work through that. And if they conclude that that's not possible, then they have to discontinue the hearing and obtain another interpreter.
Okay. So say the hearing is not continued and or perhaps the complaint isn't made or it's not obvious. Obviously the person doesn't speak English, so it wouldn't be that apparent, perhaps. Then it becomes a part of the appeals record. So in the forms that are completed by the party, the complaint is made there. Is anyone review them other than so it's mainly up to the appeals office and the CUIAB board panel for us to review that? Is that the fail-safe?
So for complaints that are,
There.
when complaints arise either by phone call or contact after the hearing, they're directed to the supervising judge of the office to handle. If they arise at the board appeal level, the supervising judges are also expected to review all of the incoming board appeals, so they should be discovered there as well. And then sort of the last level of review would be at the board.
And then we, of course, have the obligation to review that as well.
And we receive concerns from all of those levels, and we field those to some specialists in the field.
So I guess the takeaway, Ms. Supervisor Smith, is that on the to review input from our constituents, there's two ways of doing it. We either say, here's a comment section and you can weigh in on that, or the other is to go out and do a survey, I guess. I'm not suggesting either or both. I am saying that I think that this is an exciting project. It's a game changer. And most of in fact, I would say almost 100% of the major technology changes that I've been a part to in 4 levels of government have resulted in a doubling of the budget, missed deadlines, and this has just been a glorious exception. But I would suggest that we look for best practices in other, not necessarily California agencies, but how other agencies deal with improving the system by whatever. I know that every time I call any Amazon, whatever, now you can't call them, but any say telephone service, streaming service, I immediately get asked, do you want to stay online for a survey? Now, not everybody does, but I do think that there is a best practice here, and I don't quite know if I've heard it so far. Anyway, that's fine. And we're not finished with the program, so plenty of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lukowski.
Supervisor Smith, welcome. You used a couple of terms, expert user and power user. Those are my goals in the next year, to become one of those identified by my colleagues and friends as an expert user and a power user. My question, however, is you were talking about Pasadena and the Bay Area that aren't on CAMs, and that there's a way that those cases can be absorbed into CAMs. And I was thinking that the intake is in Oakland and they transfer those to San Jose, so that San Jose puts them into CAMs. Could you clarify how that would mean? Because that's interesting.
Certainly, in the legacy system, case creation begins when we get the data in an overnight job from EDD, and the essentials for the case are created in the system, and then a verification process has an operator fill in missing details, make sure everything's in alignment, and that the case is now ready to proceed through the process. In the In the new system, the difference is that when the case basics are put in the system, even before the operator gets onto it, we are able to input the scans of documents. Since we're not dealing with a paper file at that point, we either get those directly from EDD, who does high volume scanning, or we scan them here in the department. Since a case exists in data in both systems, we are able to employ the same process that we use when we're bringing a new office from legacy to the new. We're able to do that with a selection of cases. So if they've identified a list of 500 cases they need to move, we'll go into the legacy system, extract those 500 cases, put them in the new system. We then attach the digital files, either scanning them, or we've been receiving digital files from EDD for a year and a half now. So any case that's come in the last year and a half, we don't have to scan. We have the digital files from EDD. So then we're able to assemble those in the new system and send them in bulk to a new office.
If 99% of our hearings are done by the telephone, and we can virtually get the files from EDD and assign them to, we usually do it by geography, right? You know, you're in the Bay Area, you go into Oakland, but that's not necessary, is it?
Right. The geography becomes much less important. We are not tied to it anymore.
So some of these field offices may be irrelevant. No, just kidding, just kidding. So we go there.
Watch it, Member Wachowski.
Interesting. And that's even before they convert to the CAM system.
Right.
Thank you.
So the question I have, maybe it be for you, Mark, or maybe for Judge Kutry. So we're always going to have a certain part of the population that doesn't either have access to the equipment or the expertise to go online. And so based upon past, adoptions of technology, what do you see as that component of the population that will not be able to utilize the sort of things that we've been talking about this morning?
Be a success if we have a 50% user rate online. We've polled other agencies and asked. Now, the cause of action or the claim or whatever it may be arises differently in a lot of different agencies. So a lot of them, you can only file a complaint online, and so then it lives its life online. We're not like that. We have to serve everybody equally.
Right.
So if a user just says, I either can't or won't become a portal user, they get the same experience that has existed for decades, and we continue by mail. But I've heard this bounced around that if you get 50% uptake, you're in a pretty good spot.
Okay.
I would strive for much higher, but I will give it one major caveat, and that is if EDD successfully rolls out its very ambitious digitization project and moves the majority of its users into its new portal, and then allows a bridge to an appeal, we could take advantage of an increased user rate. And we're working very closely with them to be sure that that process will be part of their new major enhancement. But otherwise, we're fully prepared to operate in both environments for the end user.
Okay. Actually, I was kind of surprised by the 50% rate. I thought it might be higher, but okay. I'm glad I asked the question. I'm surprised.
Sure, Alan?
Yes.
It may be interesting, our public libraries, because a lot of people will go into the public libraries to use the computers for services, and that may be, who would have thought that your librarian would become a power user on the CUIAB appeals, but the future in 2024, it looks bright.
Could I add a point that
Questions of the
addresses, Chair Allen, could I add a
Yes.
point that addresses the question you had
Please.
earlier? So one of the things in preparing for coming out of pandemic situations is we have equipped every field office with 3 hearing rooms that are set up for face-to-face hearings. our volume has not even approached saturating those 3 hearings per location. But we do, this department has always valued the personal touch and that face-to-face interaction being available. And we have built that into our infrastructure, and we are equipped in every office to deal with that. So if users prefer or require a face-to-face appointment, we have it available in every office throughout the state. And
That's
they
good to hear.
Certainly
Thank
can
you.
use that.
That's good. That is good to hear. Well, now we will proceed in our agenda to a report by Robert Silva, who will give us a report on our Administrative Services branch.
Thank you, Chair Allen, and good morning, if it's still morning, to board members. I'll start off with a quick hiring update. We did have somewhat of a lull in support staff hiring over the last month, and we only had 1 new support staff hire since the last board meeting. However, out of the 27 currently pending recruitments, we do have 1 that should come out of name clearance process this week, and we have 5 additional for which the supervisors have turned in all of their hiring documents, and we expect them to enter the name clearance process shortly. We also have 2 more of those 27 recruitments for which the interviews have just been completed, and we expect them to perhaps enter name clearance process as soon as next week. Moving quickly to purchasing, with the last month's adoption of our budget, we have released office supply ordering allocations to all 18 of CUIAB's cost centers so they can proceed with purchasing the supplies they need. We have also released the operating equipment purchasing direction to Sandra Garcia, NIT, who does the purchasing for data processing goods, as well as Victor Saldana in administrative services for non-IT purchasing, and Doug Mattis of admin, and Doug's going to be in charge of doing all the facility upgrades that we discussed during last month's board meeting. 2 weeks ago, all departments in California joined in a meeting with CalHR to discuss CalHR's, in a partnership with Guidehouse, their Learning and Development Strategic Plan project. The purpose of the effort is to modernize the approach to developing state employees and create a culture of ongoing training. The first step in that process is that all departments will be interviewed by Guidehouse, and our interview is actually tomorrow. So that's slotted for 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. The next step after all departments are interviewed is there will be a survey that CUIAB leadership will complete that will ask for information related to learning and training opportunities, covering things like just our general departmental learning and training budgets, training delivery methods and modes for both mandated and non-mandated job-related training. After that, all CUIAB employees will receive a confidential 15-minute survey that will be used to understand our employees' learning and training experiences. And both the interview and the 2 surveys will be put together by Guidehouse and CalHR as feedback, to incorporate into what will become the state's strategic plan for learning and development. This is a multi-month plan, so this will probably be over about a 6-month period that this kind of takes place. We did, also a couple of weeks ago, a representative from Nationwide Savings Plus program paid us a visit to connect with our employees for retirement planning. As you know, with the large influx of employees over the last 3 years, our workforce is now made up of employees who are new to state service, as well as many that are nearing retirement consideration. I spoke at length with this representative, and they offer 2 one-hour seminars. The first that focuses on the benefits of enrolling in their plan and how it works in conjunction with Social Security and CalPERS. And the second is focusing on people that are nearing retirement planning and best practices for that. So over the next couple of months, well, it could be as soon as a month, we're going to set up webinars for all CUIAB employees, a lunchtime 1-hour webinar that they can attend for both of these purposes with regard to Savings Plus. And lastly, I want to announce the retirement of Administrative Services Associate Business Management Analyst Corey Shu. He's been with the state for 30 years, 13 of which has been with us. He joined us in 2010 initially as a facilities representative, and soon thereafter accepted the position as our department-wide security liaison. He overseeing the installation and management of our CUIAB physical access control hardware and applications, as well as our hearing room security cameras. He also oversaw the contracting of vendors for our facility security response, contracting with CHP for physical safety and security, as well as acting as our emergency evacuation coordinator. We wish him all the best in his well-deserved retirement, and I want to thank him publicly for all the hard work he's done for CUIB for the last 13 years.
Absolutely.
And that is my report.
Well, I would comment there's always retiree annuitant opportunities in the future for some. Speaking as someone who does not believe in retirement, but that's just. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues for questioning. Any questions, Vice Chair? Member Ng?
Other than to reiterate that at the next meeting, I think someone mentioned any of the impacts on our agency concerning legislation that would have been signed by the governor or otherwise.
Member Wachowski?
I look forward to October's report on the strategic plan being developed by CalHR and Guidehouse, and see how we move along on that.
Well, the next thing, I would turn to our board counsel and ask board counsel, is there any business for closed session?
Thank you, Chair Allen. There's not today.
Well, hearing none, I would like to take this moment before we adjourn to acknowledge the birthday of our esteemed member Ng, who I have great respect and affection
I
for.
only celebrate every other year, though.
Regardless, didn't want this to go by without
Thank
acknowledging
you.
your birthday. Are you a Virgo?
Yes,
Okay.
in practice as well.
Okay. Well, having established that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.